All right, with the hour of 6 upon us, let's call the Planning Commission meeting for Monday, December 4th to order. Please call the roll.
Commissioner Barnes.
Here.
Commissioner Urbani.
Here.
Commissioner Chorin.
Here.
Commissioner Gentes.
Here.
Commissioner Stoker. Alderman Stralchuk.
Here.
Mayor Nurbin.
Here. First up, we have approval of the minutes from our meeting last month.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion or corrections? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are approved. First up, we have a public hearing for Infinite Gymnastics. The applicant is seeking a conditional use grant to allow for approval of a fitness center located at the property at 6350 West Donges Bay Road. Is there a motion to go into public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No, we're now in public hearing. Is there anyone here tonight who wishes to speak to us about the Infinite Gymnastics project? Hearing and seeing none, is there a motion to close public hearing?
Move to close public hearing.
Motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're back in regular session, and we'll take up the consent agenda. Okay. We'll set aside item 3.1. That's 3.1 on my electronic comment. Okay, 3A on the paper copy, 3.1 on the electronic copy. Okay, we'll exclude item 3A from the consent agenda. Okay, Commissioner Stoker is going to recuse himself. So for all the other, for the Infinite Gymnastics proposal and the other items on the consent agenda, minus item 3A.
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion on those items? Hearing and seeing none. All those in favor, Commissioner Schaefer?
There's no one here from Tory? Okay.
There is.
Oh. Was it? No one that was a neighbor, I guess is what I was thinking. Okay, thanks.
Oh, we have a motion and a second. No one wishing to speak. Is there any final comments? Commissioner Barnes, are you pushing the button?
Pardon me. For the Torrey Drive item, that's part of this package?
That's part of all the items being considered at once, yes.
Very good. Simple question on, it's really for clarity, for the items being approved with the tree plan and the final plat approval. I assume that with what I read, the trees are going to be similar to what's nearby, bottom line.
Tree board, and they will be planted sometime before June. I don't know what the species in the other subdivisions are, but the tree board vets that process out pretty thoroughly.
Okay.
And we have the letter of credit in place, or the escrow in place already for the planting of those trees, and we have a condition that'll be done by June. They just couldn't get them in this late in the season.
In the other, and that's fine. And the other is, I was just wondering, when going through, are there going to be streetlights in this area?
Has been none proposed. No. No. Streetlights, the only requirement for a streetlight is typically at a new street intersection with the cross section. This is an extension off of Torrey Drive that's already there. So I don't believe the development agreement required one there. And if they want to do private ones, that's really up to the developer. They haven't proposed any at this time.
Okay, points of information. Yeah. Thanks.
All right, any other comments? If not, all those in favor of approving this consent agenda minus item 3A, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Hey, when I'd like to speak about 3A.
No, we're getting to 3A. Yep. We are getting to 3A right now, in fact. So item 3A is we have one person registered to speak. It sounds like maybe a second, perhaps. do we want to, since we're considering it, do we want a short staff overview, and we can maybe take some public comment?
I can do the quick staff overview here from the podium. This is very loud. So, 3A, correct? The Aspire Homes, Phil.
Correct.
That item is a request from an applicant who currently has is under construction for a new home, a single-family home, Lakeshore Estates subdivision off of Lakeshore Drive. The applicant submitted a grading plan as well as a green infrastructure plan with their building permit that's been reviewed by staff. The only reason that they need this approval is because their fill exceeds, or their fill and earthwork, I should say, exceeds that 1,000 cubic yards, which is our trigger for planning commission approval. Their grading plan, as reviewed by staff, currently has 5,000 cubic yards of fill proposed, and it's on the screen right here. The only thing I'd add is that they're also installing some rain gardens, which they're required to do, that will capture some of the runoff from the roofs and collect the downspouts and sump pump and that kind of thing and slow down the runoff. So we reviewed this for consistency with the existing drainage pattern of the area, as well as for any upstream drainage, making sure that no upstream drainage is getting impacted by this grading plan. So.
All right, thank you. Boy, hot mic there. We have one person registered to speak. Is it William Schumacher? W.M. Schumacher opposes and wishes to speak. 13947 North Lakeshore Drive.
Yes, that's correct. So I'm the property owner just to the south of this property. And my concern is that the developers already put in the foundation, everything about 10 feet above the ground. And now they're asking for a conditional use to fill in 5,000 cubic yards, which is, if a 10-yard dump truck, that's 500 trucks of fill. My property is already low, and I'm very concerned about what's my protection against my property being turned into a moat. They've already started dumping today. Over 10 trucks were there dumping. So why would they be allowed to build a house 10 feet out of the ground and then fill in all the way around it? And today, in my mailbox, I received this notification of the Planning Commission. So I have no use of really studying what they're planning and how they're going to plan to do this. They also have some of these little ponds or something, but those ponds have to drain. So if you're going to be collecting that much stormwater runoff from the building and the land, and they have to build some sort of pond to contain it, then those ponds have to drain. So what's my protection against this property interfering with my property? What do I do in a year or two from now when mine starts sinking? That's my concern. And I don't know the answer to it. Unless you're going to guarantee me that you'll rectify the situation if anything goes wrong.
I guess we don't make any guarantees, but that's why those green infrastructure measures that Cole talked about are in place, because those mitigate the stormwater runoff from new development on those properties. They're expressly designed to do that, which is what the city didn't used to do 30 years ago. So I don't know how better to answer your question. Maybe staff can address it when we're
Did the
done.
Planning Commission know that they were building it 10 feet out of the ground?
Planning Commission doesn't review architecture.
Okay.
So the Architecture Review Board reviews architecture. I think this is just coming to us now.
So
Because of the
500
fill.
trucks are going to be dumping fill in. So my next door neighbor's going to be putting 500 trucks of fill in.
We understand it. Maybe Cole can jump in and clarify a couple things.
Yeah, this was a bit of a strange situation. So the builder actually submitted a building permit. We reviewed the grading plan, approved the height of the building, as well as that green infrastructure plan that you mentioned. They found out mid-project that they needed this approval, so they get 1,000 cubic yards of fill with a building permit just right off the bat, just through our staff approval process of building permits. The reason that they need this 5,000 cubic yards is to conform to their plan here, and they needed to come to Planning Commission to get that additional 4,000 cubic yards of fill approved. So that's the reason why the foundation's already in, basically, and that green infrastructure plan's already approved. So they have fill on site from the basement dig and that kind of thing. That's why it's already underway.
Any further questions, or we'll move on and we'll debate it here at the commission?
Okay, I'd just like to make a note of my disapproval of it.
I think we've got you formally noted as not approving.
Okay.
Thank you. Any questions from the commissioners on this item? Commissioner Stoker?
Cole, was there any reason it needed to be this high out of the ground? Was there groundwater issues that you know of?
I believe the builder did allude to some groundwater issues. There is a wetland, I think about 80 feet to the west of here, so that obviously kind of signals higher groundwater. They also were proposing, I believe, a walkout, and the site is relatively flat but slopes down to that wetland area, so that's the reason for that height difference.
Commissioner Torn?
I mean, for our sake and the gentleman that was at the podium, can you explain how the two ponds work?
Yeah, so I think this group has heard this before, but the couple things that we do review for, whether they're subject to the green infrastructure requirement or not, which is what spurs those rain garden installations, is consistency with the drainage pattern as it is existing, so not pushing water where it isn't already going to a different place, and making sure that upstream drainage isn't being impacted. The rain gardens are sized in consistency with the MMSD requirement, so that green infrastructure plan is actually an MMSD requirement. They need to capture a ½ inch of precipitation runoff off of all the hard surfaces they're adding. That's how they're sized. I think actually the next, Jack, if you don't mind, go to the next page. The next page shows the locations of those. It's just 2 rain gardens downstream of the hard surface, so those will actually act as a measure to kind of reduce the flows that wouldn't otherwise be treated if they didn't meet this requirement.
So those are just kind of to slow the flow, the natural flow.
Yeah.
And to the gentleman's concern, the grading should address, in your opinion, any water runoff onto his property? Correct.
They're not discharging water to anywhere that the lot isn't right now. So you can kind of see there's like well, actually you can't really see too well, but there's a swale kind of on the south side of their grading limits, south of their building and driveway, that'll kind of capture the water before it continues south and bring it to that rain garden there on the bottom of the screen.
Commissioner Barnes?
Yeah, part of this is kind of being new with the commission and learning some of the processes, but I guess I was surprised when I went out to the site to see how much of it was done already. And again, I felt a bit uninformed, but I don't hold objections to what's being proposed and so forth, but I just wondered how this type of circumstance is avoided or minimized where there would be other site developments of any kind where, oh, we need more fill than whatever the automatic approval, accommodates, so that we, the city, are avoiding these kind of last-minute changes. And I know that's inevitable in construction and so forth, but nonetheless, it's a significant
Yeah,
Oh.
and Yeah, and it was a little frustrating for probably both the applicant and us because when we reviewed the grading plan and we're looking at drainage and stuff, obviously the applicant would have known how much fill they needed. That's not required to be actually written down in our building permit application process, which is why they were probably unaware of this approval, which is just in our ordinance. So we're actually working through right now and creating a separate form because of this situation so that we don't run into it again and have to stop the builder at that 1,000 cubic yard threshold, which is what they're approved for with the building permit, and then have to stop, come here, get approved for the rest, and continue. So that's why it is where it is right now.
So am I hearing then that staff will be giving a little bit more scrutiny on this
Correct.
in the future?
Correct, yep.
Sounds like we're making it part of the standard building form questionnaire,
Yeah.
building permit form questionnaire, which is what was going to be my question. How are we closing the loop so we can try to avoid it as much as possible going forward? So that's good. We're doing that. Commissioner Strelchak.
Yeah, I'm on the same page as everybody else up here. I guess I've just got a question. If this is being built 10 feet above grade, I mean, like, nothing flagged at development that we say, hey, what do you have for fill? We need to actually review that. That's something that I would have hoped would have been caught at the staff level prior to getting here, and then we would have had everything all in one package to approve.
Yep. I completely agree. I wish we would have caught it. We can't very easily determine how much fill they're bringing in just based on these plans unless we do a calculation on our end. But that's not typical with what we do. So that's why we're adding it to the building permit process so that they're telling us up front and not running into this situation in the future.
Just as a commission, I really don't want to be in the awkward position of like, no, 5,000 is too much. You only get the 1,000 or 1,500, and then somebody's built in good faith, and we're stuck with a decision, that hey, it really doesn't benefit them. Or there are runoff issues or something else, and where are they at now? So, thank you for bringing it to our attention, and it sounds like we've got everything buttoned down with the runoff to address the residents' concerns, which is my number one concern. As well as just making sure that we try to avoid this in the future. So thank you.
Commissioner Stoker.
So I just want to be clear, Cole. Had this been brought to our attention prior to, it still would have been the same result. You see no reason to deny this. I look at it and it looks like a perfectly acceptable grading plan. It meets the MMSD requirements. So even had this come forward, we still would have been sitting in the same position.
Correct, yes. We recommend, staff would recommend this for approval. There weren't any issues with the grading plan or anything else they needed to submit that caught our eye.
And I bring that up because we have been put in positions before where someone's trying to hold a house 9 feet out of the ground where there are grading issues that cannot be met, and that's a whole different animal.
Right.
This, we don't really have any challenges from.
Right.
Any other comments from the commissioners?
Move approval.
Motion and a second. Last chance on comments or questions. Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that item is approved. On to regular business. We have Congregation Agudas Akim Shabbat. Applicant is seeking a conditional use grant approval to allow for a restaurant at the property located at 2233 West Mequon Road.
Do you want
Jackson,
to open
give
it?
us a quick overview.
Do you want to open it? There's a public hearing needed.
Oh, is there? I missed that. Well, thank you for reminding me.
Move to go
This
into
is a-
public hearing.
Thank you. There's a motion.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor of entering public hearing, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are now in public hearing. Is there anyone here this evening that wishes to speak about this item? Hearing and seeing none.
Close the public hearing.
Motion to close, second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? This item's back before us now. Take it away for a quick overview, Jack.
Sure, this is the deli at Crown. This is, some of you probably realize this has been there for several years. Originally, what happened, this was approved several years ago for a cafeteria at the facility, and then it basically kind of morphed into a public space. And we notified them that because of the public aspect of it, they had to get a conditional use for a restaurant, which luckily, because we changed the zoning from residential to institutional, they have that option under the IPS code to have a restaurant as part of their institutional use. It's a relatively small, it's 880 square feet roughly. At capacity would serve for about 30 people. They're typically open only until 3:11 and 3 daily. They do have some extended hours. Occasionally, they couldn't really pin down the dates for it, so the conditional use basically allows them to be open from 11 to 8, but most of the time they'll be open 11 to 3. So between the existing facilities on site, this should be a very minor impact to the site. And, you know, it's been open for a couple of years now. We haven't received any complaints. I know that's not the way we want to do things, but we haven't received any complaints on the impact of the use to the surrounding area, so we do recommend approval.
Thank you. Any questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Barnes?
Yeah, just a quick question on, I don't take any objection to the proposed, and other than, could there be the possibility of our being faced with a sign?
Yeah, that's
Sometime.
one of the questions they did ask, and then if they have to go through that process, if they want an additional sign, and if it doesn't meet our sign code, they'll end up back in front of you as well. They may be able to get away with it under their current requirements, but if not, they would come back to the planning commission
I
for a
think
waiver.
that's how this came to our attention.
Yes, correct.
We'll take care of the
Thank you.
conditional use first and
Yes.
sign second. Any further comments? Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any last parting comments? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And that item is approved. Maybe we'll see a sign request come back, but until then, everything's approved and on the up and up. So.
Yes.
Next on to Lakeside Development Company. The applicant is seeking a land use plan, concept plan, and rezoning recommendation approval from R3 to R5/PUD for a 19-lot cluster open space preservation subdivision for the property located at 11743 Northport Washington Road. Before we get on to staff comments, we have one person registered to speak tonight. Doug Janish from 11805 Northport Washington Road. Or wait a minute. Yep, that's right. That's his address.
Yes.
11805 Northport Washington Road. Wishes to speak, did not indicate support or opposition. Please come to the podium.
I donated my ears to the industry years ago, and I can barely tell what's going on here, but I recognize the pictures. Let me explain. I'm Doug Janish. I live next door to that proposal. I've been there I've been there before most of you were born, or maybe all of you were born. I've got 81 years living on that property next door. I've seen a lot of things happen around here. That 11743 development proposal, well, I got that by city notification that there would be a meeting today, and the agenda wasn't available until Friday, 2 business days. That sort of smacks of a, how should we say, a rush deal. Somebody's trying to get something through before the holidays. Fast track kind of thing. About a third of that property contains the last remains of a natural habitat. And apparently that's being protected with the proposals. That's a good thing. Now, I used to own 40 acres north of that, and I got taxed out of 30 of them, and ultimately sold off the 30 to the same development company that's working on this thing. But that whole area has, how should we say, been destroyed by what I would call corporate greed. the whole Killa Creek and Bay area has been silted in with development that the city did not properly control. As a consequence, my 40 acres, they used to have 4 acres of wetland, ended up with more than a third of the acres as wetland. And of course that's destroyed the value, but I mean, I enjoy the property anyway. Now we have this 10 acres to the south with a proposed 19 lot development. Now, I've got 10 acres left, and I'm under a city mandated 5 acre minimum. I have 4 buildings, none of which are as big as the 2,700 square feet proposed for next door, but I'm limited to a 5 acre property next door to this thing that basically, how should I say it? It has the density of a trailer park. I'm not enthused with that. I like the idea of doing the planned unit development and saving the wetlands and the forestry area, but 19 units, 15 feet apart? That makes no sense at all. I would, from my point of view, a high quality 6 or 8 units in there would be fine. 10 mediocre quality ones would be fine. 19 trailer park pads, not so much. So that's my bid on it, and I've given you copies of my thoughts on it. Do what you must do.
All right, thank you. Any further comments?
I can't,
Any further comments?
I can't hear you.
Okay, just wanted to make sure you were done.
Wait a minute.
Just wanted to make sure you were done. Oh, sure. Just wanted to make sure you were done before we moved on. Just wanted to make sure you were done before we moved on. Okay. All right. All right, thank you. I think we'll move on to a quick staff report.
Sure. I'll just clarify a couple of things. First of all, I do have the,
I'm going to check first. Is there anyone else here who wishes to speak?
oh, sorry.
That's my bad, not you.
That's okay.
All right.
So I do have
Let's see what else.
the site on the ortho, just to give you some context of the neighborhood. Basically, there's 3 parcels. It's hard, I'll highlight them so it's easier to see on here. There's actually 3 parcels in total that equal to 10 acres. Just to the south of development is the Astor Woods side-by-side development. And then to the north is Mr. Genesis' property here. He is actually not zoned R5 acres. He's zoned R3 1 acre, just like this current property is. My guess is he kept the 10 acres because he has outbuildings and maybe some agricultural uses, so he had to keep the 10 acres for the agricultural. But he's not zoned 5 acre residential. He's zoned 1 acre, just as this site is. And the other thing I'll add is that this will have to have a public hearing in front of common council. That will be in January, so we're not fast tracking this in any way. This is the first step in the process to getting this to the motion. So this site itself, we've met with numerous people over the years on this site. Some wanted to do commercial. There was some, aspect of single family or side by sides on the site. As you can see, it's somewhat of a long, narrow piece, and then there is a nice stand of trees in the back. So when we met with Lakeside, we always have spirited discussions with Lakeside. So we went with them several times, and we both kind of came up with this conclusion of a single family development. And we thought, because it is a buffer between the plex to the south, which allows up to 4 units an acre, and residential to the north, this would be a good location to do our R5, which is rarely seen in Mequon. So this would be basically a half-acre condominium development. Couple of things we kind of had to iron out a little bit throughout the process was, one, was this going to be a public road or a private road? So they've determined that it would be a public road, and then as part of our approval, we recommend that there would be right-of-way dedicated so that if it does ever develop the property to the north, this would actually connect that public road to that site. The other issue is the access point and the report that shows two versions, one to the north, one to the south. Staff referred the one to the north in discussions with the applicant. I guess we convinced him that this is the better location. They wanted the one to the south because it did somewhat line up with the theater entrance and exit, but it would have had to bifurcate a wetland. And this doesn't really line up real well with the theater, and sometimes there's heavy traffic coming out of that theater, so we felt this northerly access point would be better. As the gentleman did say, we are preserving all the trees in the back here. This will all be part of an open space common area to the condominium association. There's also a tree line of white pines in this location that will be preserved as well. The only thing we did note, I did have our city forester go out there. He did find two specimen trees located right about here and here, right near the building pad for Lot 3. He recommends them being preserved, but after speaking with the developer, they don't know if they can avoid those with the grading of the site, so that they would have to ask for two specimen tree removal at a later date. If the commission is in favor of the removal, we'll just have to modify our conditions of our report because the conditions currently state that no specimen trees would be removed. Other than that one issue, I think we've kind of resolved everything else. Again, these are single-family condominium pads. We did ask them to push the pads 10 feet back off the right-of-way line, just to give a little bit of space between the right-of-way and the actual building pads. There's no conflict with potential grading issues. Again, we're really happy they're preserving the wooded area. The nice trail going through there. This is the closest thing I could kind of find to a similar circumstance would be like in the Vildu Park, and I can show you an example of that on the ortho as time allows. And then the other one that was similar to this is the Concord Creek Reserve condominiums. Those are in the front off of Mequon Road. Those are the same half-acre densities, just for your edification. So with that, we do support the proposal and with all the conditions in the report. So thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Any comments, questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Chorin.
Jack, the Astor Woods, what is the density per acre?
They're pretty close to the density of this one. I think they have 30 acres total, and they have about 17 units, so it's pretty close to half acre. Now they could be up to 4 acres per our code, but because of the side-by-side single family, it's really hard to beat that 4 acre density. So they're pretty close to the density of this proposal.
Okay, so the density is pretty close to what's existing to the south.
Yes, correct.
One other thing, there was a comment made about the units being 15 feet apart. Is that true?
It's the actual unit pad would be 15 feet apart, so I may go back to the screen here. So basically what you're getting here, this is a single family condo. This is somewhat similar to Hidden River, which is also in this area. So basically you get a pad of a certain size, and then you build your property within that pad. So those pads could be 15 feet apart. Doesn't necessarily mean the houses will be all 15 feet apart. I'm sure there'll be some gaps in there, but they wanted to keep the pads somewhat close together to try to preserve more open space at the back. So that's how we ended up with that 15 feet.
Yeah, I just did some quick math. Astor Woods to the south is 1.76 units per acre. This is 1.9, so it's very close.
Yeah, it's very similar.
It's like 1 unit off from being identical. Any other comments from the commissioners? Any thoughts on the ingress-egress location? I think that's Commissioner Strelchak.
The ingress egress is great. The plan as it's laid out, I think, is great. If that it gets approved tonight, I think that it's well laid out and it's well thought out. I guess I'm gonna voice some concern just over the density, and when we sit in these positions, we get feedback like, hey, we're creeping out, the density's creeping, we're changing zoning and things like that. And I know we've got a quality builder. I've advocated for you on multiple projects, throughout the city. I've been excited to have you involved here in Town Center as well as, and I've seen some of the other projects that you've worked at, and I know your work is top notch, and this is going to be an A1A subdivision. However, I struggle with the density, and I'm going to be very honest and forthright with it. I would prefer to see this remain at the 1 acre or, some something closer to that. I don't know why we're shifting our standard just because somebody's got a good plan that comes forward that could be a little less dense. So again, that's just my general question.
Yeah, I don't think we're really shifting our standards. We typically don't have a lot of R5 type developments proposed in Mequon. I think that's just because in the past they probably didn't go over very well. But we do have a lot of R6, which again allows up to 4 units an acre. And in this area, if there's an area in the city that is a transition area, I think this is it. I mean, you have commercial all along Port Washington Road, you have the Astor Woods, you have the other condominium developments further south than that, you have commercial off of Lexington, the two Lexington buildings, you have the banks here. So there's a lot of other land uses in there that are much more intense in this. So we felt that this was an area where if we're going to have this single family half-acre density type development, this would be it. We're not looking to make a mass change anywhere else in the city, but I think this piece, and then eventually if the piece to the north develops, I think those would be very good land uses for those types of those areas. The Plex development just didn't really work well here because of the narrowness of those lots, and everybody's looking for basically at-grade single-family ranches or side-by-side ranches, and that just didn't really lay out very well. So we thought this really worked for this type of application. And again, we only have two other sites in the entire city that have this, and Concord Creek Reserve is one of them, and it makes sense there too because it's a buffer between the Mequon Road and the single family to the west. So I don't think this is going to be a pattern that's going to develop going forward. I think this is probably an isolated event, but I think it actually fits pretty well in with the land use pattern in the area.
Yeah, it's really isolated to infill development surrounding commercial and transitioning to residential. Commissioner Chorn.
Jack, I'm kind of curious, should the property owner to the north entertain something like this in the future? Would they be allowed the same density?
Well, they'd have to ask to rezone it as well, but I don't see why we would have an issue with it if we're going to allow it. I mean, we would have the connection, you would have the road connection in the back. Let me get back to the plan. So you'd have a road connection to the back, and then that would circle around and tie into Port Washington Road again. So that I think it would probably suit the same land use needs as this one would. So I don't see why it would be an issue in the future. We would never approve that without a plan in place. We would never proactively rezone it to match. We'd keep it at the R3 it currently is.
Commissioner Barnes. I saw you had your hand up earlier.
Clarified my questions, so
Okay.
I'm in support for
Got a
what's
2
being
for 1.
proposed.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
So we've been building in Mequon for 45 years. We've done, traditional developments, 1 acre lots. And quite honestly, this is a result of what our clients are looking for. And I compare it to my generation, Tom's generation. We're looking for first floor master suites. We want to be a part of a community. We don't want to have a full acre to maintain. So this is a direct result of what our clientele is asking for. This will primarily be empty nesters, we assume. It's not going to be restricted, but that just seems to be the type of clients that we attract to this type of development.
It's good to know. Thank you for that. Any other comments or questions from the commission, or perhaps a motion?
I'd like to move that we proceed with the staff's recommendation for approval of this proposal.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further comments or questions?
Just one clarification.
Yes.
With basically the motion or the report reads now that those 2 trees will have to remain. If you want to allow them flexibility in the future, then we'd have to modify that requirement to say that they would have to come back and prove that at another time. Else that they'll have to stay, because that's in the ordinance itself.
Which staff condition is that? Just
It is with the specimen trees. Well, actually, the way I wrote it, I think you have enough flexibility because I just have compliance with the tree preservation ordinance, so they still can
Okay.
actually come forward.
so it would have to come back.
Yeah, they would have to formally come back.
Oh, actually, this is the one. I think we mentioned the tree ordinance twice on this one.
Oh, there's on there twice.
17.
Oh, yeah. One was an engineering comment, probably one was a planning comment, so. belt and suspenders.
We've got it double covered.
Yes.
I happened to notice that reading through it.
Mayor, can I make a comment? I just want to make it clear that this is a conceptual plan, and we are in the process of working with Sewer Pack. We've had the site delineated for wetlands, so there will be some tweaking to this plan. We're not going to change the number of units or anything, but some may turn, some may, you know, they're just not going to be a bunch of squares. We found out that the environmental corridor is actually further to the west than what is drawn here, which will give us more flexibility.
Well, and also the pads, right now, the pads are 40 by, or 45 by 60, and we may change that. Some might be wider and less steep, and some might be narrower and more deep, just to accommodate, you know, a variation of exterior elevations.
So
But they'll
just
still be
conceptually,
within that 15.
Yep.
Yeah, we're approving a conceptual plan, and there's a
It's always building a site plan.
There's a condition of the ordinance that says any substantial change would have to be revisited as a PUD. So we have, in the past, have seen a lot of flexibility with the PUD. I mean, the number of units won't change, the general area of the road won't change, the entrance to the Port Washington Road won't change unless it's moved a couple feet here and there. But we do have to allow the flexibility because we can't require them to go through a full engineering and review before we actually give them an answer on the actual zoning. So that's common in all our PUDs.
Good point of clarification. We had a motion and a second. Any further comments or questions?
One last question.
One last question from Commissioner Stralchek.
Is there anything that we could do to, you know, try to ensure that these are a little further apart, that 15 feet just... If I vote no, it's only because of the density and the closeness of the buildings. I'm just not comfortable with it.
Well,
I'm comfortable with you and everybody.
The 15 feet
everything else.
is the closest that the pads can get. I mean, the reality is that they'll more than likely be much further apart than that. But if you look at the site plan, you can see some of the homes as they get towards the front or the back, depending on which side of the pie they're on, could get, you know, as close as 15 feet. We're not saying that's what it's going to end up being, just that we want to have that flexibility. In some cases, that could be the case.
If I understood the other comment, with the critical environmental corridor being farther to the west, that'll give them more flexibility to stretch it out in the middle, but that's a final
Possibly,
plan,
not-
yeah,
it-
possibly.
The delineation of the environmental corridor is going to happen this week, well, depending upon the result of this meeting. We have had the wetland delineated, but we have not had the surveyors put it on the survey. So we don't know exactly where it's going to sit, but it appears as if it might move slightly further west.
Yeah, it won't be a lot, though. There's the wetland complex is right here, and the corridor line is here, and I think there's a line of dead ash that probably they'll shift the corridor over to remove the dead ash area, but the wetlands are going to be your control anyway. So they'll have a little bit of flexibility, but it won't change much.
Is that far west area, the flood fringe area, is that...
There's
is that
also
the biggest concern?
floodplain, that's the yellowish line here, that's floodplain as well. So there's a lot out there. So we made it clear from the day one, we're not going into that area to touch. There's too many nice trees in there. Mike said there's a very large old growth stand of trees in there. There's wetlands, there's environmental corridor, there's floodplain. They know that they have to stay out of there. I think it's pretty clear.
Jack, did we address the rezoning, or is that presumptuous?
That's what we're here for.
That's
Yeah,
what we're
that's what
talking
we're-
about.
Well, I thought we're approving the site plan, but...
No, this is the rezoning and concept plan.
Okay.
Correct, we're all good. Commissioner Hawley.
Nope.
Sorry, Schaefer.
Yep.
Hawley's not here.
I just want to make sure that someone explains to Mr. Janish what his existing zoning is, and then that there's a potential that this could be extended to him should he choose to do so.
Yeah, we
in the
spoke on the phone
future.
several times. I
Okay,
can reach
just
out to him.
to make sure. And then I guess I feel like I'd be remiss without saying I'm familiar, Mr. Zabjak, with your idea of tweaking your plan, and I feel like the word substantial to you might mean something different than it does to staff. So I understand it's a conceptual plan. I would just maybe err on the side of being conservative in what you change in the plan, because I think we're familiar with kind of the back and forth that we've had with some of your other plans. So hopefully we won't get to that point with this one.
I think you bring up an excellent point about communicating with Mr. Janis. I'm thinking maybe we should write it down in letter.
Yeah, that's
letter
fine.
form.
Sure, I can do that.
Just so it's clear. And I agree. Yeah, I think if there's a disagreement with staff, we'll be hearing about it. It'll be right back here before us. So
Yeah, we've done it before. We've experienced controversy before with that. We figured out. We figured out. We'll get there.
I mean, we're talking about spending probably another $20,000 for the engineering. We just don't want to go that route, only to get turned down. So if conceptually this makes sense, and then Jack and company can decide what's tweaking and what's substantial.
oh, this would be before the Common Council when?
This will have first reading in December and then public hearing in January.
So yeah, there's a little bit to go. Just don't go cut a check tomorrow. But so if we approve it, it moves on to the council for final approval, because it is a rezoning. So,
Rezoning and land use plan.
any further comments from the commission? Why don't we call a roll on this one? Always a technical challenge. Yep.
Commissioner Barnes,
Yes?
Commissioner Urbani,
Aye.
Commissioner Chorin,
Yes.
Commissioner Gentis,
Aye.
Commissioner Schaefer,
No.
Commissioner Stoker, Alderman Strelchek,
No.
Mayor Nurbin.
Yes.
Vote passes 6-2.
We'll see you in January at the Common Council.
Thank you.
On next to St. Francis Borgia Church. The applicant is seeking a minor request for approval of a fill permit to allow for 1,500 cubic yards of on-site earthwork for the parcel located at 7963 West Pioneer Road. Evan and Cole are going to give us the
This
quick
one will
overview
be-
here.
This one will be me,
Okay.
once I get there in my packet. There we go. So this applicant is coming forward for another fill and excavation exceeding that 1,000 cubic yard threshold that needs planning commission approval. Location is on Pioneer Road. It's a cemetery just west of Wauwatosa Road, I believe. Applicant is looking to install an aesthetic pond.
Hold on just a sec. Hey, for everyone in the back of the room, could you please enter the hallway? Gentlemen and lady. Hard to see. Oh, you're right. Thank you.
So the applicant is looking to propose an aesthetic pond. They have a little issue with flooding in one of their areas with graves. So what they're trying to do is kind of fix this situation here. Basically, the plan would be to have a pipe extend from this low area into their aesthetic pond, and then their aesthetic pond would have another outlet pipe that would discharge further southwest on their property. The applicant, I can't remember if he put it in his narrative or not, but they weren't actually intending on any import or export of soil from the site, so that 1,500 cubic yards is actually going to stay, proposed to stay on the site without any actual hauling. So the excess from the pond would just be spread around the site. So we have a few staff conditions, need to obtain their permit, but that's pretty much it, and we would recommend approval.
Thank you. Any questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Schaefer.
This is right at the top of a hill, right, Cole? It's kind of like,
The cemetery itself?
yeah.
Yeah, it does kind of go up from the
I'm
street.
just thinking about where the water's going. So it's nice that it will be contained because that's obviously makes it really challenging within that cemetery. If it's going off to the southwest, and I went by here the other day and I forgot to look. I think that's either farm or residential that it will be piping, that it will be running onto. So is it running onto someone's property? I guess it's already on a hill, so there's already inherent water runoff. But this sounds like it'll concentrate it a little more.
Yeah, so, like I said before, we look to make sure that the existing drainage pattern's being maintained, so, that low spot is right here on the property. That's where those graves were in that picture previously. This is their little intake pipe here that'll go from that low spot into their pond, and then they need some sort of, outlet pipe in case it rains into that, rainwater's gonna get there, so we don't want it to fill up to a dangerous degree. So
Does
that
the
outlet
water
pipe-
generally flow that direction now anyway? It just has to get over a hump and then?
Correct.
Okay.
So right now, if this would fill up, it would overtop and go straight west here, and then continue down to the south. So what they're doing is just bringing it further south, interior to their site, and then discharging it. I think this is probably about 30 feet off their west property line, and then it continues south from there.
Perfect. Good question and an even better explanation. Any other comments or questions, or perhaps a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any comments, Commissioner Stoker? None? Okay. Hearing or seeing no additional comments, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? That item is approved. On to item 5C or 5.3, as the case may be, depending on which version of the agenda you're working from. Attorney Rex Endreg for the Magla. The applicant is seeking a minor request for approval for a temporary use and structure for a recreational vehicle to be used as a temporary living accommodations through 10/31 of 2024 for the property located at 326 West Seacroft Court. Why don't we get a quick overview from planning staff?
Yeah, so this is on, say, Seacroft Courts over kind of by the lake. So yeah, the trailer's been present at least since August 4th. That's when Code Enforcement Officer Scott Pinzer sent his first order to correct. Project dates, the original building permit for the renovation of the home was sent out on August 9th, 2021. And an addition was authorized on October of 2023. They have gotten, they've renewed their building permits for the construction. So they're requesting the recreational vehicle, and it does not meet the required standards for either a caretaker unit or an ADU, as the code sets out. So either of those things need to be attached. It's for long-term use for relatives, or detached use of a guest house for short-term, and it can't be used for commercial uses or profit. And this kind of sets the precedent that we don't want of having kind of residential parcels having temporary dwelling units for commercial uses. And this could be something like Erin Hills or Hogfest or something of the like that we might not want to kind of set the precedent for and have coming down the line with this passing. Also, the proposed time frame kind of exceeds the allowed for temporary use to a large degree. The codes they kind of want it for December of now to October of next year, and the code only allows for May through October allowed, and a maximum of 18 months. And with it starting at least August, it's going to come up on 14 months, so we're already kind of approaching the maximum time allowed. The specifications for the trailer put it at 28 feet, which again exceeds the maximum allowed for the code, and it would need commission approval. The applicant sent photos taken today of other trailers of properties around Mequon. I just kind of wanted to reiterate that we don't go out looking for infractions to enforce. They're taken by complaint. So it really wasn't an incident of selective enforcement. It was really kind of gone through the correct process, and it was taken to the code enforcement officer and appealed here for temporary use approval.
Thank you. Any questions from the planning commissioners? Commissioner Barnes.
Have residents in the immediate area been informed of the proposal other than the standard sign that appears when it's an agenda item? Have they been informed?
Yeah, we send out notifications for planning commission to neighbors around. So. Yeah, and then the homeowners association for what's it? I can't remember the name of the neighborhood. Barbaro Estates. Sent a message that opposed this approval. It violates two of their declarations for the neighborhood association. Construction needs to be contained to at least a year for any renovation or other construction, and no temporary structure can be used as a place of temporary residence.
Any other questions or comments from the planning commissioners? Commissioner Jordan?
So let me see if I understand this. The trailer's been there for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just discovered, shall we say. There's a question of whether this would be considered being used for commercial use. And if I understood you right, this trailer would not be allowed with the covenants of the homeowners association. So do they not have the authority to force the owner to get rid of it?
Well, then it would be a civil issue if I'm correct. And this is a picture up on the screen. This is a picture of how visible it is from the street. So you can tell it's pretty visible from kind of where you're standing, right near the right of way.
Well, I think we received a complaint, correct? We
Correct.
didn't go out looking for this, we received a complaint. It's
Correct.
I mean, effectively, with another dwelling unit on it, we're doubling the density allowed by code. I know there's some assertion that there's some argument over the length of the unit. I think our code, we just updated our code recently for RVs, where we define how we measure them. It's including the hitch. That takes all argument out of the process of just measuring the cab of the vehicle or the hitch. It's inclusive. I think that's pretty clear in the code. And I know we received a bunch of pictures today citing other locations that may have RVs in Mequon, but just because they have them doesn't necessarily mean that this one can too, because as Evan pointed out, we operate on a complaint basis. We don't have a guy actively out looking for problems, but when they come to our attention, then we deal with them. So I'm not sure that the presence of any other RVs necessarily justifies approving one here, but I'm interested to hear what other members of the commission have to say. And then we'll get to the applicant, Commissioner Strelchak.
I think where we're at here is, in my opinion, from everything that I've read, even including the packet that was dropped on the desk today, I mean, it's a code violation. And the residents, meaning the HOA, obviously the HOA could go to civil suit, but really at that point, they have covenants. They don't want to incur the extra expense. We've got a nuisance property in our neighborhood, and the issue there is there's 10 homes, and we're all going to fund the civil suit because somebody's attorneyed up, and they want to dig their heels in and do something that's really, quite frankly, not even allowable by code. And all they really want is for the city to enforce the code that's there. They purchased a home in a community based on a code that's existing to maintain their property values, and this one appears to be clearly in violation of that city code and ordinance. So thank you for bringing it forward. I think it's it'll come with a motion and a vote for me to decline this, moving forward, unless there's some significant argument. I saw somewhere in there that we were discriminating against somebody. Not at all the case. I don't even know who the individual is that lives there. I don't know any of their background or any of that other stuff. All I see is there's a complaint that came into the city. The unit that's being stored on the property is a code violation. Scott Pinzer sent out a code violation and using appropriate measures with a written notice to the landowner, and simply the city would like it to be removed, and it seems like a pretty simple request and, does not fit within what our city code and ordinances allow. So my hope is at the end of this that we vote in favor of removing it and the neighbors are happy and the community maintains its standards.
Any further comments or questions from the commission? Otherwise, we'll give the applicant a chance to respond. Let's go for that now. Attorney Anderegg, take it away.
Yeah, thank you. Is this on?
It sounds like you're hot there. Yeah, that's good.
Okay, good. I guess first of all, on behalf of the Domagalas, I'd like to thank the commission for the opportunity to be heard this evening. I'm not aware of anything that came from the HOA. I wasn't provided anything, so I can't really speak to that, although I'm aware that there is a homeowners association with some rules that I think go back to 1982 that talk about or that speak to the possibility of a temporary living place following construction of, and I think it was when that development first came into being. But I want to be clear about the reason for the request, because the subject line of the memo that I think was sent to this commission, as well as what's on the agenda tonight, is that indicating that the RV is to be used as sort of temporary living accommodations, and that is absolutely not the case. Nobody is living there. Nobody will ever live there. The limited purpose for the RV is that it is a place for workers who are working on renovation, where they can sort of spread out the plans, their construction plans, clock in, clock out, and take a break. And I don't think it's unusual for a construction site to have sort of a temporary office on site. It has also been used as a shelter for an overnight watchman a few days per week to prevent theft of construction materials and equipment on site. And if the fact that somebody is occasionally there overnight constitutes a living accommodations, well, then this commission could make the discontinuation of that a condition of approval, and the Domagalas would be happy to comply with that. They're not building a new home on the property. They're completely renovating an existing home that tends to take longer than a tear down and a rebuild. This is a large house. It's approximately 12,000 square feet. They're committed to getting this finished as soon as possible. It should be noted that this property is off the beaten path on a side court with virtually no traffic. The properties there are 2 to 3 acres, and the residences are not close, from which I think it could be assumed, and I guess I didn't know this, but it was confirmed for me a little while ago that we're here, I guess, because of a complaint by a disgruntled neighbor, which further seems evident from the number of other trailers that we spotted during a brief drive. That was really the only purpose for submitting those other photographs, is because it would seem to me that the city wasn't out looking for these, that we could assume that there was a neighbor who made a complaint. I didn't know that until just now. And I don't think I ever used and don't intend to use the word discrimination. My sense is that what we're requesting a temporary permit to do is something that is not uncommon in Mequon without a permit, and that perhaps this commission has not really dealt with many requests such as this one, because most reasonable people would not have a problem with a new neighbor having such a temporary use. The staff analysis and recommendation speaks in terms of caretaker units or accessory dwelling units. I think that analysis indicates that the purpose of this ordinance is to ensure that single-family residential areas remain single-family and they don't become plex or multiple family areas. This temporary trailer in no way defeats the policy behind the ordinance. It's not a detached guest house. It's not an accessory or dwelling. It's not for the long-term use of relatives. It's not for the short-term use of guests. It's not for commercial activity or profit. All of those are words and language lifted directly from the ordinance. Therefore, allowing the temporary use requested would not set any precedent that would undermine the very purpose of the ordinance. So the staff analysis is completely wrong when it suggests that the request before you could set a precedent for temporary lodging within single-family districts that could result in commercial activity. Nobody is residing in the RV and nobody will be residing in it. The Domagalas continue to reside in their Shorewood homes, so the enunciated concerns, I think, are completely unfounded. The remarks about in the report about campgrounds and mobile home parks are also misplaced. The temporary use we're requesting, to use the words of the ordinance, which presumably express the primary concerns, is not something that is hazardous, harmful, noxious, or offensive. It doesn't create any traffic or ingress or egress problems in the neighborhood. Doesn't create any kind of a noise condition. Doesn't materially affect the health or safety of anyone. And in fact, to the extent the night watchmen were permitted, it actually increases safety while it's there. So it's just an approval that would only benefit future residents and taxpayers who are simply increasing the value of their property. It would allow them to finish the project sooner, and given the limited purposes for which it's being made, the request, and the conditions this commission could put on it, it wouldn't create any bad precedent. So for all those reasons, I'm respectfully requesting that the commission would grant the permit. Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to know no one's living there, although I will state, I'm not sure we don't have a track record of approving such things even if they're empty and being stored. So that's somewhat problematic, especially at these sizes. And maybe you can, planning staff, remind me of the changes we just made to this code a couple months ago. I've lived a little since then, but I think there's more flexibility with smaller units, which, if this is truly a temporary thing just for construction, it might be more appropriate for the site than a rather large, nearly 30-foot long RV.
Sure. Good evening, Mayor and Planning Commissioners. So the changes that were just approved in May of this year did provide some additional flexibility from our previous regulations. One vehicle of this type, so long as the total length does not exceed 20 feet, there's also weight requirements, height requirements, can be stored unenclosed. But there's only one type of piece of equipment like this on the property. It doesn't matter if it's snowmobiles, a recreational vehicle, a trailer, one type of piece of equipment like this, so long as it's under 20, is allowed. And then what we, there are some locational requirements about where it can be stored unenclosed on the property. And then what we really focused on was the ability to have one additional vehicle or a piece of equipment such as this, so long as it doesn't exceed 27 feet in height, but only for the peak travel period, which is May 1st through October 31st. And we did allow for some exception of being able to extend that so long as it didn't exceed more than 7 consecutive days. So you could request going past that banked calendar time frame with the approval of the community development director, but again, it's limited to only 7 additional consecutive days.
Thank you. I knew there was a threshold at which we would allow basically storage of the unit on site.
Yeah,
uncovered.
and maybe I can add to a little bit of the history, because we also received an open records request today for our number of citations that we've issued in the past 5 years related to this. Now, I don't have 5 years at my fingertips, but when we presented this to the Planning Commission starting in March and worked all the way through Public Welfare and the Council through May, just in 2022 alone, we issued 42 violations related to recreational vehicles and vehicles of this type. So anything that exceeded 20 feet in length. Typically, there were other dual violations with the vehicle as well, in terms of, like I said, the location or maybe not being on an impervious surface, which it is required to do. So again, in 2022, 42 violations were issued.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the commission? Commissioner Schaefer.
If it was a construction type trailer, what category, is there a separate category for that?
No, they would still have to comply with 20 feet or less.
So if it was a 20-foot construction trailer, it could stay there?
Mhm. Yep.
So that would serve the purpose of what you're speaking of. I struggle too with the pictures that you sent. I struggle with the fact that there was a lot of time spent on this particular ordinance by staff in particular, and so I think it was well thought out, and it was intentional, and so I struggle to say, well, we'll make this exception, because it does become a slippery slope, and you made a lot of valid points as well, but I do think, I think the intent was pure, and I would like to uphold it. If we want to raise our taxes, perhaps we could hire someone that could go around and just issue violations all over the place, and then we'd have probably a lot less of those pictures for you to take, but that's not our reality. And so yes, it kind of comes in the form of the breach, and when someone reports a breach. So there is a way to meet what you are trying to do with what I assume is going to be a wonderful result, but I think I would not support it staying as it is. Still frustrated with the fact that there's all these other examples that you can point to. So I feel you on that. I recognize that.
I appreciate that. So if it was less than 20 feet, we'd have no issue?
Yeah, we can share this section of the code with you after the meeting or tomorrow through email. There's some other standards that you have to meet, but yes.
And it's probably fair to point out that in that process of reviewing this code, we did try to push for a little more flexibility, and the council did not react favorably to that. So what we ended up with was better than what we had, and offered more flexibility. We had tried to make it a little more flexible, but that was not received well when we reviewed it at council. So there was not broad support for any additional flexibility. Commissioner Urbani.
I am hearing what you have to say, and I agree with Alderman Strelchek also, but I think part of the problem for me is the length of time. That a short amount of time having a larger vehicle there I'd be fine with, like 6 months tops, but having something there for 14 months or however long that we think it might have been there already, that's just a little too long. Especially if you're really not using it for somebody to live in, that it's really being used to lay out your plans and things like that, I think 20 feet is certainly sufficient. And I do understand there's another way to lock up your construction materials. You could put some temporary fencing up with a lock on it. Of course, is that more unsightly than a trailer? I'm not so sure. So it's just, but that's maybe more secure, and you don't have to have an overnight watchman then. So, there's just some options here, but I think the length of time is quite long.
Commissioner Strelchek.
I think when we rewrote this, or we clarified really what the purpose of this was, is we wanted to allow flexibility to residents who, had summer activities and they needed their unit in their driveway for a very short period of time. Really, the intent wasn't to leave an RV in the driveway. I objected to that, actually, for the full season. People use boats, they come in and out, they go fishing, they bring it in on the weekend. I had a neighbor that had a larger RV, and we had discussion with Kim, and he's like, well, I don't really get it. I'm like, well, let's talk to Kim and let's really understand what the use of this is and what's allowable. And he explained that he gets back from a trip, and he's got to unload his stuff, and he's got to load his stuff prior to the trip and things like that. And then, they found something that went wrong on it, so it needs to sit in their driveway for a couple days so that they can, take that and go to the dealership to get it worked on. Then it comes back, they go through the final cleaning and before they put it into storage. And all of that was addressed when we wrote the ordinance. That's what the 7 days is for, and with staff approval on situations like that. And that's what the intent of that is. it's not an ongoing construction something. Really, you know, I think me as an alderman, just in general, I would object less to this if it didn't have living quarters in it. You know, really it's you've got construction going on, you've got an RV that's in violation of the ordinance, you got an order to correct. You know, like, I want to be reasonable, but I just don't see how I can for this and then say no to others, because we've got to be very equitable across the board. You've named a couple extra sites. I'm sure our enforcement officer will be going out and issuing order to correct over there. You know, it's unfortunate that somebody, who's upset that they have to remove theirs wants to call out everyone else in the community in the process, but again, that's part of it, and quite frankly, they're in violation, and they're going to get the letter, and they'll need to move it as well. So,
We were asked if we were formally making a complaint, and we clarified that we were not. So, we're not.
Once we know of potential violations, we go out and look at them. So if there's violations, we will follow our enforcement process.
Yeah.
Yeah, once you know it's there, you can't ignore it, but it's just the way it works. Any further comments from the commissioners, or is there a motion?
I'm going to move to deny.
Second.
Motion and a second. Why don't we call the roll, just to be clear?
Okay. Commissioner Barnes,
Yes.
Commissioner Bonney, you're
Aye. Yes, I'm moving to deny. Aye.
Court noted vote yes.
I to deny.
correct. Commissioner Chorin,
Aye.
Commissioner Gentes,
Aye.
Commissioner Schaefer,
Aye.
Commissioner Stoker, Alderman Stralcheck,
Aye.
Mayor Nerben.
Aye.
Vote passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, our last planning commission item, we'll have one policy item following this, is the design to construct project. The applicant is seeking building and site plan approval to allow for a 4,382 square foot two-story building for the property located at 10404 Northport Washington Road, known as the Refresh Aesthetic Center. First, we need a motion to remove this item from the table.
Second.
Motion and a second to remove from the table. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, now it's actually in front of us. Why don't we go through a quick staff report, and we'll open it up for questions and get some feedback from the applicant.
So yeah, this was the building and site plan that was in front of you guys in September. Just a quick refresher on the site, the landscape and site plan. It's right up here. So yeah, this is at the corner of Donges Bay and Northport Washington Road. The proposed building is in the upper left corner, northwest corner of the site. And there was a pretty significant right-of-way dedication by the applicant with a number of zoning and building waivers attached to the CUG for the site as well. There is sidewalk that's going to be replaced along Northport Washington Road by the applicant, and it's going to go from, let's see if I can get the ortho up here. A little too far. So as you can see, it kind of loops down through, this is Goodyear, Life Storage, Chalet. So the sidewalk kind of comes from Goodyear's driveway and kind of comes down to the existing driveway for Ferrante's, which kind of presents a public safety risk, which is how close it is in the right of way and in close to the Northport Washington Road. So we're going to have the applicant straighten out the road from this driveway in front of Goodyear and come through and kind of kitty corner it into the corner of Donges Bay and Northport Washington, and everything north of the applicant's parcel is be reimbursed through TIF. So that's kind of what the site plan looks like. And then for the building plan review, there were 2 meetings with Commissioner Chorin, staff, and the applicant where we took guidance that the commission had gave us at the September meeting, which includes window concern about lack of symmetry, preference for the arched windows, and kind of concern about the treatment of windows
in the service rooms, either during service or not. The number of building materials was a concern as well, just how many there were and kind of their placement on the building itself. And then just overall the box style of the building. There's been significant concern from the community in the past about previous projects having this box style and what that might mean for Northport, Washington, and Dodges Bay at that prominent corner, especially kind of having that corridor through there being more prominent from the I-43 renovation as well. So yeah, staff and Commissioner Chor and the applicant went through 2 meetings, and what you see on the screen, I'll see if I can blow that up, is the revised renderings that the applicant provided to us this week, or last week, and it removed the building material up here that was a little bit more aluminum stone, and removed it from the other side as well. And at that point, and then there was not these arched caps on the second floor windows that are there now, and when it came in, there was no feature on the west side facade, which should be, I'll have to go out a little bit. So yeah, this looked like this, and it was a little bit more columny, and the applicant removed that central piece and put in more of the aluminum stone, or not aluminum stone, aluminum wood colored feature. And then there was an installation of a door on this eastern facade that will be used as a kind of a break area for employees. So I have the revised version right here, and then you can see the original here. So you can kind of get an idea of what might have changed. And then the reason that we're kind of bringing this here now is that through the meetings with staff and Commissioner Chor, the applicant showed a lot of grace in meeting the guidance that we gave them, and filling out the things that we really needed them to do for this building, and maybe get it as close as to the guidance from Plan Commission that we could. But that being said, having those boxes checked still doesn't really give us a sound reasoning to say this is perfect as is, and just because they check the boxes, it's not really might not be where we need it to be right now. So staff did come up with a list of things that we could do to maybe get this to a better or closer to what the commission might like. Includes arch windows on both the first and second floor of each facade, including the cap element, revising the south facade entrance to represent symmetry, so bringing that kind of khaki stone down to just be a symmetrical entrance. The inclusion of further details on the east facade there. You see there's not much going on there like there is with the other 3 facades. The inclusion of a double window on the second floor of the east facade above the doorway. So that would be that would be right in here. And then the architect should address the floor plan and screening for visual obstruction in the service areas in the treatment room. There is a janitor's closet right here, so that might present somewhat of a challenge to kind of get that screened enough so people walking in aren't having that be the first thing or second thing they see. And then staff still has some reservations about the lack of emphasis on Port Washington Road. While we do have that sidewalk, having it maybe tie into the sidewalk of the building or entrance to the building could be beneficial as well. And then staff also kind of talked about having some sort of rooftop or other architectural features like cornices, maybe an expansion of the awning,
or some other projections that kind of extend out a little farther. There were some examples in the report here. So yeah, what we're talking about for projections would be something like this, which is over there by the kids' dentist and over by Fiddlehead's Coffee. This is the neighborhood hospital, kind of more north on Port Wash. You can see, while it is a little bit, it does have those kind of rigid lines of a box. It's kind of more compartmentalized, and there's a little bit more definition for each of the sections, and kind of accentuates those things a lot more clearly. This is Lamoise. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Les Moise. So you see it has a little bit more character in the rooftop elements. It's got a little bit more of a cornice on top of each of those sections, and just accentuates those a little bit more. This is near Baldiv Court. There's actually you couldn't get a great picture, but there's a sunscreen kind of feature going across here that staff thought might be kind of applicable on the second floor. And this is Aurora, and it's just got a little bit more rigid roof line with hip roof going on here, which kind of breaks that up a little bit. So those were the examples that we kind of pulled from, and I think that's pretty indicative of what's around the area. While we're taking away Ferrante's, which is a pretty historic building, and I think it's pretty, there are a lot of people in this community that are attached to it. We don't want to kind of put up another boxy building where we might have had life storage, or one other building that has that kind of design. For one life storage, there's a chalet, there's a Goodyear Tire, there's the Fiddleheads building, and a few others that I wrote down that just kind of really accentuate the more traditional or more complex architecture going on in that area.
Thank you, Cole. Let's open it up for comments or questions from the commission. Commissioner Chorin.
Risking sounding very frustrated, I was not at the first meeting when this was presented, so I had not heard firsthand of the comments. We met. I am.
Oh,
I
just
am.
get it a little closer to the mic then. Sorry,
Okay.
I may have it turned down a little bit. We were getting a
So-
little interference before.
We've met twice with the developer. Now I can hear it. And the last meeting we had was on the 21st. And I believe the owner, the developer, the architect, all staff were there. And when we talked about the looks of the building, it was my understanding that we came to a consensus that some suggestions were made that the applicant would change and then present, and that it was my opinion that we were all comfortable with those changes. And to my great surprise, when I see the agenda and the recommendation is to table the design. So my frustration is that the lack of communication between staff and myself as the role of the architect on the board until I get the package 2 days before the event. So I think in good faith, the architect has responded to and made the changes that I had understood that we all agreed to. Should the rest of the board feel as though there are other changes that should or could be made, I'm willing to listen, but perhaps if that's the case, then one of the other board members should attend the meeting and discuss it with them.
Thank you, and I'll address a little bit of that. We got their plans last week, and when I reviewed, I was the one who found out with that first floor window, that floor-to-ceiling window is looking right into a janitor's wash basin. Yeah, so it just made me look at things from a fresh perspective and like how closely was this plan reviewed, because I think it's important to note we don't have a history of coming back and approving frosting, screening on windows. There's others that have tried to ask for that over in town center here to obscure other things they're doing behind the glass, and we don't approve those. We like full vision into the buildings, and that's not something new. So that really got me sitting down and looking at it more. So maybe you can blame me. That's okay. It's all my fault anyway. But some of the comments did come out of the last council meeting too. Is that along with the architecture, there's also maybe the planning commission doesn't know this. There's been a rather substantial TIF incentive being sought after. So when there's, like it or not, when the city's got money involved, there's a little bit of skin in the game. So then more opinions come out of the woodwork. And that TIF incentive narrowly passed. It was rather oddly contentious. It only passed by a margin of 5-3. Not to say that should sway our opinion on it one way or the other. We're the planning commission. We can do what we like here. But that this building, for whatever reason, maybe it's because it's replacing a historic building. Although for every person who thinks it's historic, I've heard another person say it should be torn down because it doesn't look good. I just had a couple over the weekend. So that's why the heightened sensitivity. And I think at least the wash basin where the janitor's closet is, we can't have a window, floor to ceiling window in front of that. So something's got to change there. So I'm not sure we can approve it totally as is either. And designing it on the fly is not going to work either.
Right, I accept that, and I find it kind of interesting. One of the comments I had heard is that the original proposal had too many elements, too many materials, and yet some of the suggestions are awnings and eaves and cornices, and it kind of I find that, fighting each other there. With regards to a boxy building, commercial office buildings, for the most part are that shape. I don't think you can expect them to have dormers on and pitched roofs and when you have a pitched element, in a lot of cases they're primarily there just to hide mechanical equipment up on the roof anyways. So I guess maybe I owe an apology for being a little ticked off. But let's hear what other people think of it.
Certainly. Any other comments from any of the other commissioners? Commissioner Abani.
So I was one that was not in favor of the multitude of materials that were being used on the outside. I think that's a very contemporary look and does not necessarily fit in with what we have going on Port Washington Road. So I am pleased with the revisions. I am pleased with there is more uniformity with the arched windows. I agree with Commissioner Chorin that I don't think you need to add cornices and awnings and all those other things. However, it sounds like I also agree with Mayor Nurbin about the service area and the treatment room. Let's not have the window looking into the janitor's closet or what have you. I didn't look that detailed, but I like the new design. I appreciate that you're willing to work with staff and make some adjustments and some compromises. So I like what I see.
Commissioner Schaefer.
Marty, were you okay with the Port Washington facing, whatever that would be, the west facade? It does feel a little more understated, I guess. That was something I noticed as well.
My understanding that it was requested by staff so that there's a front presence on Port Washington Road, right? And I think if we look back at the original one, it was a little bit heavy, wouldn't you say?
It's not the original one.
Which one?
That's the first revision we brought to staff after the planning commission. That's actually not the original.
Sorry, which facade? Now I am second guessing myself. Where, Evan, can you point to east on there?
Oh,
Okay, so this is the one, that's Port Washington, that's what I thought.
it's the east side of Port Washington Road, the west side of the building, yeah. Yeah.
I think the original didn't have anything on that face, did it?
The original had nothing on that side, so after comment from staff, originally before we met with Marty the first time, we came back and staff had suggested that they understood that this is not our primary entrance. We're being required to use Dodgers Bay Road as the entrance to our site. Okay? The sidewalk, Port Washington Road, I know it's there. Doesn't get a ton of use. It's not where people are coming in from. So we need our entrance to be on Dodgers Bay Road, so people enter our site. So staff suggested that we take this dominant element we have in the back here. They asked us to look at replicating that on Port Washington Road side. We replicated that element there. That's what it looked like at the time. That's what it looked like the first time we met with Marty. We realized, we discussed it, talked about it. We eliminated the central column in that element. We added a little bit more of the wood type material, which brought us to this element. We resubmitted that to staff, and that's when we started talking about the TIF and all that kind of stuff, so we postponed our next meeting to meet with you. We had another meeting with Marty and staff, at which point we made some more modifications, and we changed we have actually changed the building to be 100% brick without that center course line that requested staff and Marty. And when we re-looked at that, it was determined that that also was a little too heavy. So this last meeting we were in, we talked about adding the belt line. We modified a couple of the arch windows to create a little more symmetry at Marty's request. We discussed that not all the windows needed to be arched. Some of the windows on the east side and across the back side were more of a service area. It's okay that they're a little more understated. They don't need to have the arch. They're smaller windows. We had a really great meeting with staff and Marty, and we came up with what we thought was a great solution. And I gotta be honest with you, we were very floored by the staff recommendation. We've been working with staff and everybody very, very closely. We've been willing to modify the design of the building. Obviously, we want to keep the core substance of what the building is important to us. We want it to have that a little bit more of a modern appeal, but we're willing to make some changes to continue to add that into that. Smaller stuff like the bathroom, Mr. Mayor, we can solve that. In a lot of municipalities, I can put spandrel glass in there and it's not a concern. If it's a concern here, I can remove the bathroom or the laundry tray in that room, and I can make it something else, so it's not that. That's not the kind of thing that I would like to have this denied for. We can work around that, but I think that for the most part, the building has come a very long way. The concern about a presence on the east side is completely, once you get all the landscaping that we're required to put in there, and that we're putting in there, the primary focus, as staff has said, is from the Port and Dodgers Bay intersection. That east side is completely invisible to everybody unless you're already on the site. It's not a prominent entrance. It's just we feel like we've done a really good job to bring it back to where it is. A couple of minor tweaks in here I'm okay with, but I don't want to start adding sunshades and I mean a cornice maybe, but to just wholesale have staff redesign our building for us in the last second was pretty disappointing.
I'm sorry, can I?
Sure.
Are
Go
those
ahead, you're
renderings
still
the
on.
same as what's in the packet? What you have, the big ones that you have?
That is not the most current, actually that is, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
that's what's in the packet. That's
Okay.
the most current rendering, yes.
I appreciate all the work that must have gone into this between you and staff and Marty. I feel like I might have been the one that suggested, hey, you should work with Marty. You're gonna love him. I'm sure you did. Yeah. My gut reaction was, first of all, we all have different opinions about aesthetic, right? And I also know what my wheelhouse is, and this is not something I was trained in. So I try to defer to Marty because that is his expertise, and that's why that's part of his role on this commission. My gut reaction when I saw the renderings is, and I kind of had to go back and forth like Evan did, because it wasn't so dramatic that it was like, whoa. But the subtle changes, I liked it. So I felt like it was, so I had to read a couple of times to see, okay, what else are we suggesting to change? I guess where I'm going with all this is I would be comfortable with it as it is. My bigger concern would be, because it is a facility where there will be treatments, we've had enough discussions with other facilities similar to that related to window coverings, where you will require something for privacy, and that tends to become a point of contention with what that's going to look like and what is considered acceptable. So I don't know if we're at that point yet, but that would be something that would be
Yep. We actually
a
discussed
concern.
it at the regional plan commission meeting as well. It was a major, I think Ms. Mayor brought it up. That was a concern, and obviously any kind of a medical facility, any facility where privacy is of a concern for procedure, you have to have that privacy. But
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be there all the time. We discussed the fact that the client currently has a facility like this. When they do a procedure, the shades come down. When the procedure is over, the shades go back up again and the windows are exposed. When I walked in here today, I walked past 4 offices on the ground floor of the city hall here, and the shades were down. Everybody uses shades for a little bit of privacy when you need it, for the sun on a really blinding day, whatever the case might be. But the applicant has indicated that their intent and the way they operate currently is that those shades would not be down all the time. And that's the best that we can do.
Again, I think, thank you for all the work, for everyone that put work into this. I know it was a little nebulous coming out of the last meeting, and so I think I like the result.
Any other comments? Commissioner Strelchak.
First of all, thank you so much for working with Marty and going through those several meetings with Marty and staff and making those adjustments and being willing to be collaborative in the process. Again, in the end, really what we want to see is you guys thrive and survive in the community, do exceptionally well. Plus, we want to have something that once you build a facility, if you ever choose to move on from that facility and go to a different space, or it's not fitting for you, we want to continue to have it remain as an asset within the community. So, you know, that's the whole goal of this entire process. So again, thank you for your patience and working with staff and Marty on this. I guess my one question really goes back to staff recommendation to table. They'd want to see some other things. So I'm going to ask you, kind of put you on the spot and say, hey, what exactly do you want to see in a revision? If there's something that you feel is incomplete here, the architect that worked with the team here is comfortable with it. I'm comfortable based on the feedback, what I'm seeing here and everything else, giving a yes vote. But if there's a condition or something that I can help out and make sure that we have everybody happy with the process, I'd like to have that feedback from staff as to what that would mean in this meeting. So something simple, not a complete revamp, is where I'm going with this. So thank you.
Thank you again, Commissioners. Again, staff was not indicating that there was any direction from anyone to do a wholesale change. I can't speak to any one particular item that we listed. That we would have to see it. In fact, I said that at our meeting when we asked for these changes, that it wasn't necessarily a guarantee that just because those changes would be made, that's what would ultimately get recommended for approval. So I do want to protect a little bit of staff credibility as it relates to that. These were just, we can't ignore the concerns that we've heard in the past about these styles of buildings, and those concerns continue to happen throughout this process. So, we wanted to offer up some other images and some other ideas, not that those would all inclusively be added to the building. So I don't have any one particular one or exactly point to any of them. They were just suggestions to help the Planning Commission work through this dialogue. We all know from the past that we don't want to design it on the fly. right? So we felt as though providing you with a list and some imagery that you could maybe help guide the conversation tonight or the decision making tonight was the best that we could provide to you.
Awesome, thank you.
Let's talk about some of the stuff in generality and then see where we go. I mean, I'll start out with the east facade. I'm actually with the applicant on this one. No one's gonna see it. It faces the freeway berm. Maybe there'll be someone that develops the parcel behind the Goodyear driveway someday, but man, for as long as they've wanted to develop that and nothing's showed up there yet, I'm not holding my breath for that site until maybe the whole Goodyear site redevelops. So that one's not on a public road. It's not very visible. I'm fine with that as is. For me, something has to get done with where the janitor's closet in and where that window is, and I'm not sure how that affects that part of the building. I'm actually fine with the other.
It's an easy fix. We can solve that.
I'm actually fine with 3 of the 4 sides of the building. It's just the issues going on that front side facing Donjas Bay Road, and that particular room and that use there, and maybe the right side of the building just feels a little unfinished. I'm not sure if cornices are the answer or whatever, but it's just everything looks real good. 2/3 of the westernmost part of the building, and then it's just kind of transitioned to the less finished look.
I don't know, we're talking a 2-story brick building with stone accents and storefront, and, I mean, this is a really nice looking building. The fact that we've got stone on other areas of the building doesn't detract from the fact that the proportions and the materials and the style of the building still looks beautiful.
It's much better than it used to be. I agree. It's just something's got to change already with that where that one room is. And I don't have the answer here tonight.
Honest to God, Mr. Mayor, I can solve that one room behind that one window when I leave here in about 3 minutes, and that won't be there any longer, and I can solve it to your satisfaction. So that I really don't want that one window to be the main focus of why we're concerned with that facade.
My only issue is we won't be able to see it, and we're supposed to be.
I'm happy to go back to staff and show Marty the change that we made.
Well, I think we may be headed there, but I'd say we're much closer than we were. We're kind of working around the edges here, and I'm normally not the architecture guy by any means. I usually defer to Marty on such things. Commissioner Chorin.
With regard to that janitor's room, could it be moved internally so that room is no longer that function?
So I'll tell you what that used to be. So originally we had the hallway that runs down that area, and we had a window at the end of the hallway, so the hallway didn't dead end into nothingness. It allowed natural light into the building, and in a previous iteration, we needed that particular room there. We chose to put it there thinking we could use spandrel glass to solve the problem with the vision. Okay, if the concern is that the spandrel glass creates a screen and you don't typically allow that on windows, that's fine. We can eliminate the room. We'll move it internally. We'll open up the glass again. We'll have it to be the end of the hallway to let natural light into the building. As people walk by, they'll see activity inside the building. The room can go away entirely, and the glass will be clear, and it'll solve the problem very easily.
Go ahead.
Yeah, one thing too, I don't know if the other members of the board recognize that the upper windows, the upper plane above that belt line, the brickwork is set back a couple inches, so it's not in the same plane. So there'll be a shadow line. Where the signage is, that's in the same plane as the lower brickwork, but it differentiates. You'll see a change in plane between that area and the area to the east of it. So I think that adds a little bit. I think at one time we might have, at one of the renditions, they may have been in the same plane, and in the last meeting we pushed it back, so it gives a little bit more of a differentiation.
Correct.
Commissioner Jensis.
I've held back for a while on this. I am I am concerned that we're getting beyond outside of our lane here. We have an applicant who's hired a reputable design build firm, who's produced a design and responded to multiple questions, multiple comments. We have an established and recognized design professional who serves on our commission. I think at some point we got to let the professionals do what they do, and I'm a lawyer, I'm not an architect, but I like that design. So take that for whatever it's worth. It's also very expensive for the applicant to go back again and again and again on revisions that I'm just not seeing them as being critical to the function of this committee. And I think we've taken this about as far as we can take it. My recommendation would be that this be taken off the table, and that if we subject it to any further review, one final review with Marty and with staff, and we move on with it. I would have no problem if this plan commission deferred to one final review with Marty and staff, and try to get this thing done and let the professionals do it rather than us muck about and redesign a building for people. I just think we've taken it too far.
Thank you. Any other comments? Or a motion?
Strongly agree.
I
Commissioner
agree as
Stoker.
well. I actually, I believe I was the only member who voted against tabling the last time. I was okay with the original building. I'm kind of in the business, but not in commercial, so I have to defer to Marty. And again, I couldn't agree with you, Marty. We start analyzing footprints and floor plans inside these buildings, and I know you got the hang up with this. If they want to have a mop bucket, if they want their guests to walk in and see a mud room or a mop, that's their prerogative. I mean, I don't think I have never, in all the buildings that we've approved, analyzed the floor plan and had any conscious thought about what am I gonna be viewing as I'm walking past or up to the front door. Now, it has been brought to the commission in certain buildings where we've got people trying to put shading and things like that, but we are not the people to be analyzing what the view is going to be through a window as you approach the front door. I just think that's way out of line. I agree. I would approve this with one more round of review by Marty and the applicant and staff, and I don't need to see it again unless they just can't come to any sort of agreement.
Thank you. I'm not going to apologize for spotting the janitor closet behind a floor-to-ceiling clear glass window. So, in general, I agree with you, though. Commissioner Strelchak.
Yeah, just really quick. I mean, I agree with the other commissioners here. You know, we've got professionals that do this, but I do also agree with the mayor. I mean, really, the feedback that we get from the community. You know, we allowed one building to go in, and from the corner, it was a corner building as well. You could see their whole copy room was there, and it was something that we didn't identify. There's a building that I voted against that, you know, has a stairway and lights and advertising, and it doesn't fit exactly, you know, what the community had intended, even after we revised it a little bit. So really, all we're trying to do is just, you know, allow you to build the building that you want to build, right? Because it's the applicant's investment, but also fit in with the aesthetics within the community, and just try to offset anything that we possibly can. Janitor's closet, you know, I'll make a recommendation for approval condition upon one more review with Marty and staff, and a consensus to be gained with this team that we're on par for really where we want to be on this. You know, I was kind of vocal last month, and you guys just really went to task and brought to the table something improved. You worked with staff, and again, you know, thank you for doing so. So appreciate it. So motion to approve with one more review per staff conditions, with one more kick at the can with staff and Marty, just as a final sign off. And I don't need to see it again.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, let's call the roll.
Just confirming,
Yes.
okay, thank you. Commissioner Barnes,
Aye.
Commissioner Urbani,
Aye.
Commissioner Chorin,
I better say aye.
Commissioner Gentes,
Aye.
Commissioner Schaefer,
Aye.
Commissioner Stoker, Alderman Strelchek,
Aye.
Mayor Nurbin.
Aye.
Vote passes.
And whenever you meet, let me know. I'll try to attend, just to close the loop. Thank you. We're going to have a 2-minute break in case anyone needs to, not 2 seconds as suggested, but 2-minute break in case anyone needs to use the facilities. We'll return for one final item with a policy update or for their sign code. So it looks like everyone's back from our break, so we'll pick it up again. And next up, we have sign code updates. Attorney Sadak is going to give us a overview of something he's been toiling on for quite a while. In fact, probably on and off for over a year. So I think we'll just go with a quick update on what you see as the changes and some of the background story for those that may not have been here when this all started. And so take it away.
Sure. As Mayor indicated, just kind of give you a quick overview of where we've been. In essence, we ended up with the perfect storm. We had a number of case law changes that came about. We had political firestorms with recalls, referendums, the Trump versus Biden, all sorts of things. We had some statutory changes that needed to be incorporated, and then we had a threatened lawsuit about, interestingly, one of the referendums that and our sign code and how we applied it. That resulted in us making some changes to the sign code as it related to right-of-way and public properties. Those of you who were on the commission at that time will recall that we went through that process to deal with just that particular specific piece. As part of that process, though, we needed to update the sign code as a whole. Historically, speech government regulation of speech generally was afforded what we call intermediate scrutiny, which just basically says that as long as the regulation is content neutral, that it's narrowly tailored to a governmental interest, and that there's ample room for alternative speech, that you're going to be fine. What is content neutral? Basically, those are your time, place, and manner restrictions. We've all heard the adage, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's kind of what we're talking about, that while you have free speech, you can yell fire. If you're in the wrong place, we can regulate that and restrict that because bad things might happen. What is not content neutral is where we're actually specifically looking at the message, the viewpoint that's being done, the specifics of what's being communicated in essence. And so that's kind of how we operated. Before the Reed case that I mentioned on that first slide, we were totally content neutral as long as we were not making distinctions about, hey, your sign needs to say X, or we're not going to approve your sign because it says Y. We were okay. Reed changed the analysis. Reed basically said that if you regulate the message in any way, it is content-based. And basically, in order to make a distinction about whether or not you're regulating the message, sometimes the message is as simple as, what type of sign is it? So if it's a real estate sign, for example, by virtue of the fact that you've made that distinction, that this is a real estate sign, you have made a distinction which then makes you not within that content neutral base, which is what we have historically done. As a result, traditional regulations were now questionable. Real estate signs, rummage sale signs, campaign signs are all things that are just very quick examples of things that we typically regulate by name and we call out specifically. All of that is subject to that strict scrutiny. The difference there is that we have to have a very compelling or very strong interest that justifies the regulation. It has to be narrowly tailored, and it has to be the least restrictive means available. Not just that there are other methods of doing it, but that we have to impact the speech as little as we possibly can in order to make that regulation happy. It is virtually an impossible standard to meet. With that said, we had a huge unknown. How these regulations in the Reed case was going to be applied to commercial signage. Historically, commercial signs were offered that intermediate scrutiny, and the issue, of course, is that in order to determine whether or not the sign is commercial, we need to make a distinction. We need to read the text on the sign to figure out what it says. Under Reed, that becomes impermissible. Thankfully, within the last year, as we've been kind of going through this process, we've had two cases, both a Seventh Circuit case and a Supreme Court case that basically both upheld the fact that commercial sign regulations are not governed by Reed, that the traditional standards of that intermediate scrutiny continue to exist. As a result, that made this process a lot easier. If that wouldn't have been the case, we would have had to do a complete rewrite of even all of the commercial type language and really do an analysis of what we wanted to do. So with that said, we've proposed a revised sign code. We'll just kind of hit some of the highlights for you and big concepts that are part of it. On the screen you'll see I reference a page number. That's the page number within the packet this evening if you want to follow along that way. The first kind of significant change that we made is in the findings, purpose, and definition section. Basically what we've done, at least in the findings and the purpose, are we really define what it is that we're looking to accomplish with this code and how we intend to do it. These sections really become important if we ever get challenged. The court is going to review those sections to try to determine what are the interests that we're trying to achieve through the purposes of our sign code. And so as a result, we really bulked up some of those standards. We relied on some of the existing case law that was held to be permissible type basis and reasons why government can regulate speech and incorporated them within our code to reflect that. Within the definition section, we basically combined all of the definitions into one section. We had a couple places where they were independent within a subsection. We just put them all in that one section, and then we eliminated any of the content content-based definitions that we had in place. Section, we'll leave it there, I guess. The permit section, sorry, I got distracted. Permit section, really there we just clarified and streamlined the language. There is a bunch of instances where we kind of said the same thing multiple times in different sections. We really didn't need to do that. You can just say it once and then follow that through. Just really cleaned it up, made it a lot easier to follow and understand and comprehend. With respect to the prohibited signs and the exemptions, we did a couple things. We consolidated some of the other sections. For example, what was sub 22, which related to signs that we typically found in the right-of-way, we moved that into the right-of-way code, as opposed to having that as part of the exemptions, because it was not a true exemption. It was an exemption with conditions. And so we just put the conditions in the right-of-way section. We eliminated some of those content-based distinctions that were there in the language that created problems for it, and otherwise just eliminated some of that problematic language. And then we also added some exceptions for signs that were allowed by other laws. So, for example, trespass would be a good example. By statute, you have to have certain standards in order to be prosecuted for trespass. You have to have a sign of a certain size, depending on how big the property is, how far apart they need to be. Those types of signs would be allowed by that. Likewise, we also exempted just general address signs. Most properties have them. It didn't seem like something that made a whole lot of sense to regulate, other than we did put a size limitation. We didn't want somebody to basically make the whole facade of a building, for example, to be their address sign. That just wouldn't work. So the biggest changes really come within the residential area, and here this is basically in any residentially zoned district or in any of our other districts, but it's a residential use. And there we basically say that you are allowed a temporary sign, which generally is a sign that is intended and is in place for less than 4 months of the year, and you have a maximum of 15 square feet of total signage that you could have. So if you wanted one 15 square foot sign, you could do that. If you wanted a series of smaller signs, you could do that as well. None of those signs, however, could exceed 4 feet in height. As we went through this process, just in terms of some of the ideas and the concepts behind that square footage, that equates to 5 traditional residential campaign signs, or one of the big campaign signs. And then that 4 feet is typically that height of that taller campaign sign. And so that's where those regulations came from. What's that? From the ground, correct. And so temporary signs, that's the biggest change. Really, there are no restrictions or regulations that are there. So that would really cover any of the typical temporary signs that we might see in a residential district. Campaign signs, real estate signs, the graduation signs that have become so popular post-COVID, the hey, come to the church picnic on Saturday, rummage sale signs, all of those types of things would be responsible there. One thing that we'll talk about here towards the end is that we did bulk up the kind of maintenance and appearance language, with the idea being that we didn't want somebody who just had a temporary sign that they allowed to deteriorate to the point where it was causing issues and problems as well. So we tried to kind of tackle that in 2 different places. As it relates to
you see these, with a big banner open or something, they look to be, 8 feet tall, and that's not going to be allowed then, right?
Correct. Basically, the code does.
You allow those under the commercial zoning as part of a banner.
Right. So the language of the code is that they are any of the prohibited signs are not allowed to be a temporary sign. Prohibited signs include those banners and those types of things, but the language there says except as otherwise provided in the code. And as Ms. Tollefson notes, we do have within the commercial code a section that does allow somebody to get a permit for those types of signs. So for non-temporary signs, we don't obviously anticipate that there would be a lot of them, but a building name, for example, if you had a residential, multifamily unit, you might have a building name, subdivision monuments, and then we put in some regulations that related to home occupations. And those regulations really kind of mirror what the existing code was. Again, because that's typically a commercial type use at that point, we were afforded a little bit more flexibility in terms of just kind of keeping that current standard as opposed to trying to figure out how we were going to deal with it if READ applied to commercial signage. The next section is the public property and right-of-way. Not really any changes to note except for one. Basically, the intent here was mostly just to integrate it within the code itself instead of just being kind of its own section as we adopted it last year or year and a half, whatever that was, ago. The big change that we did is really just based on our experience and practice. We tried to do this concept of the street reserved area and the Mayor Worth's concept behind that was that we wanted to try to make it as consistent as possible from site to site. And there's differences, obviously, if you have an old meets and bounds description which goes out to the center of the road versus if you've had dedicated right-of-way, and it was a good idea in concept, but in practice it just created more issues than it was probably worth, because we ended up in circumstances where we, to be honest, weren't sure whether or not signs could even be there, because it was not our right of way, but it wasn't our property, and it just became kind of a nightmare. And so we did return to that, first that right of way is going to control first, and where you don't have dedicated right of way, then we apply that street reserve concept to try to make it at least a little bit more consistent with the areas where that dedicated right-of-way is. It's not going to be quite as uniform as Mayor Worth had his concept was, but it'll be a little bit more standard than just kind of allowing them just to go right up to the edge of the street. Non-residential areas, as I say, not a lot of changes here, and the changes that were made are a little bit more either just cleanup or some small policy related issues that staff and I talked about as we were going through this. So first we just incorporated other sections within the non-residential section. So for example, we had a provision that was separate that related to agricultural farm signs. We had a section that was separate that related to signs on I-43. All of those are non-residential signs, so we just put that all within that same section. Likewise, just as in all of the other circumstances, we removed some of that content-based language. So for example, religious signs, which we had a code provision on, we deleted. That just became some general regulations that applied to all IPS properties. And we'll just need to make sure that religious institutions are all within the IPS district, which we believe they were, but it will require just a double check on that. Special event signs likewise just become general temporary signs that have general standards related to that. We did fix an issue with a known issue that we had. I think this actually came to you guys. There was the issue with the, was it a North Shore Bank? I think was the North Shore Bank, and they had a bunch of individual windows and they wanted to put a decal on it, and the question was, did you get the square footage of all of it or each individual window? And so we did clarify that it is just the individual window that you're basing that calculation on, and that you couldn't within the individual windows then create something that was bigger as well. It just had to be an individual type window analysis. Lastly, we updated it to match the current zoning. For example, we incorporated the Uleo Creek, the town center, the neighborhood commercial districts, all of which were not specifically called out within the sign code as it currently existed. We did also include a provision there that says that to the extent that any of those individual plans, so for example the Uleo Creek district, we went through very specific design standards and we have designed plan that's in place. That document controls over something that's in the sign code. So we just made sure that where that, we know that there are conflicts already, we address that conflict by just saying that that more specific one is going to control. We specified some of the purpose and basis of a master sign plan just to clarify that a little bit, and then specifically called out that we will require a master sign plan for gas stations, car washes, drive-throughs, and also just where you have a single site with multiple buildings on it is another area that we did that. And then lastly, there was a state statute that basically says, notwithstanding any local regulation, we can't actually restrict a development sign where they put the fence around the construction site and they slap it up with all the signs. We can't prohibit that now by state statute. So we addressed that within the code, but we did also retain the existing capability for those sites that don't have a construction fence to nonetheless continue to have the sign that we otherwise allowed them to have. That was the commercial side. And then lastly, a couple other just changes of note. First, we did authorize staff to give the ability to deny a permit based on legibility, where it is a wayfinding type sign. That's kind of a not super common, but somewhat common issue. Where occasionally we'll get a proposal for a sign and you're just not going to be able to read it, in the location that it's at, the speed limit's too high, for example. We addressed that there. And then, as I noted before, we did strengthen the language related to maintenance and appearance. Again, both just to deal with signs in general, but also in part to just deal with some of that temporary signage that is otherwise now a little bit more permissible. So with that, any questions or discussion? I think this evening the thought is just to get a general blessing if everything looks okay, and this will go on to the council for finalization. So.
All right, turn myself off. Any comments from the commission? Well, people are thinking about it. I had only one. I noticed when I read it that we added the part about being able to deny a sign for legibility, but the term legibility might end up being construed as rather subjective without a standard to refer to. I did a quick search at lunch today. There are some that are available. I'll offer one, but maybe not require that there be that specific one, but we might want to consider adding something as a standard so it's not just like, well, I don't think you can read it, well, I think you do. We'd like to not be arbitrary and vague or being accused of that. So the one source I found, there are several it appears, is there's a United States Sign Council Foundation. Can't believe these organizations exist. But they have a whole document on sign legibility that has, distance from viewing, maybe the speed of the passing vehicle, several of those things that I'm sure it's all science-based and there's professionals that do this stuff. We don't have to do that. We can just steal their work, and if that's not a good one, maybe there's a better one, but something like that would be my only comment, just to avoid getting into arguments. Well, staff doesn't think you can read it. I think you can read it. Well, we can just say this is the standard, this is what the industry uses, or something the industry uses, and that protects us, it protects staff. It should lead to less arguments, but that was my only comment. Anyone else? Commissioner Strelchak.
This is a ton of work.
Oh, it's nothing.
I mean, an
compared
absolute,
to what it could have been.
Yeah, it's an absolute ton of work, and I'm really, like, every point. Usually, I sit and I read it, and then I look for things to comment on, and I listen to what you go through, and I listen for something that might not subtle right, and everything that you addressed seemed appropriate, reasonable, equitable, everything that we needed within the, the sign ordinance. Again, there's going to be the ongoing frustration where, what do you mean we can't say that they can't do that? You know what I mean? But we do want to allow freedom of speech and support and covet that right as as an American, but still maintain some standards and quality within the community. And I think what you've got before us today really does cover all those bases. So, I appreciate the work and the time that you put into this and things like that. Mirroring off of what you shared as far as like a standard, I've seen that document before. I might have a PDF in an old computer somewhere that I can try to fish up, so many feet and things like that. I'm commercially, I guess, my question is, can you go through again, like commercially, like we're just really addressing like residential temporary signs. Can you spell out, just, verbally one more time, 15 square feet total, or is it per sign, or is it total per property? Yeah. 4 feet high.
Yeah, total on the temporary signs, and the temporary sign language actually applies within the commercial districts as well. Again, because obviously commercial properties have campaign signs, real estate signs, that type of thing, for example. The regulation there is the same. It's 15 total square feet of temporary signage, and none of the signs can be more than 4 feet in height. So you could have one 15-foot that's 4 feet high, or you could have multiple smaller ones.
Okay. Yeah, having been in the sign business and then having run campaigns and help people with others, you know what I mean? I'm glad to see it's kind of signorama around here during election time. So I'm glad to see it. We'll see if we get to enforce it and how that goes. But it sounds reasonable. People will have an expression, have an opportunity to express who they support and their candidates, but still, again, really kind of keep it reasonable for everyone else driving in the community.
Before I forget, I forwarded you both a copy of that document online. If that's not the right one, maybe another one. There might be another one easier to use.
Yeah, and on that point, I actually agree with your point that having some standards is appropriate. This was actually an issue that we just talked about last week and decided to add. And I looked for something, and I didn't find anything that I particularly liked, so I didn't add anything. But I had not looked at that particular source, and
I just recall a conversation we had recently about a window decal that we may have ultimately caved in on because we had a conversation very, very much like, I think it's legible, I think it is, I think it's not, just avoids that argument. And then, we're not experts up here, and maybe outside of one guy who used to make signs, but we're not experts by any means in these things. It makes our lives a little easier, your lives a little easier. It's better for everyone. Commissioner Urbani.
So does the sign free zone go away? Did that exist right behind the?
No, that was a proposal that was part of the right-of-way area as we were going through the process of adopting that section. That the free area, the free zone, actually did not even get adopted in the kind of version that we ultimately ended up adopting. So.
Do you have a sign in mind? I'm just kidding.
Not yet, but time is coming.
I'm not trying to encourage anyone. Any other comments?
Just thank you to Brian. I always try to sift through and read to the best of my ability. And speaking of things that aren't my wheelhouse, this would be another one. So your presentation is a good summary. That's helpful. Thank you for doing that.
I agree. It's tough to get through. I broke it up into like 6 chunks over the weekend.
I tried to read it all at once. It was hard.
Any further comments, or we're good with this? Do we need a formal recommendation?
Yeah, we probably should have a recommendation.
So there's a motion to recommend with motion a second. Hopefully that motion includes finding some sort of standard for legibility.
It includes a standard for legibility.
Perfect. That's what I thought. I heard. So motion and a second. Any more comments or questions? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. It goes on to the council. Thanks, everyone, for sitting through that. I know it's a relief for the
Yeah.
attorney to have that off his plate, but it's actually a rare instance of where it was a good thing he procrastinated. We saved a ton of work.
You knew it was
We were
coming.
looking at pretty much throwing the whole thing out and starting from scratch. Until the case came through, yeah. Announcements. In the packet, there's a 2024 meeting calendar, just as a heads up. Staff has given me a indication they want to say something, maybe?
Well, we had just talked as we drafted this schedule, if there was a preference by the planning commission about basically this meeting next year at this time. So we had a week between Thanksgiving, before tonight's meeting. But when you look at the 2024 calendar, I think we have basically 3 options. What we did is we kept it on the first Monday of December, but that is the Monday after Thanksgiving. So that means we're, distributing the packet, Wednesday. So we just didn't know if people really wanted to be at the meeting, the Monday night after Thanksgiving. Your other options are to do it the Monday night before, the Monday, leading into the Thanksgiving week, or we could push it to December 9th. It's just that for items that are going to council is the next night. Yes. So, I mean, the second would be our normal, but I just wanted, and you've got time. I mean, no one's applying for December of next year just yet. So, if you want us to poll you at a later date, we can do that. But I just wanted to raise it in case anybody felt strongly one way or the other.
How do people feel about that Monday right out of the Thanksgiving holiday? There should be plenty of time to read the packet.
I don't think this applies to very many of us, but there's a high likelihood we'll have a day off public schools that Monday. So some, I think it'll be a day off. But anyway, but it's fine with me.
All right, seems to work. We'll keep it until if we get 2-3 months out, we can
Sure.
always tweak it if we think
Double
we
check.
need to. But okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for pointing that date out. Moving on. Well, that's it. Is there a motion to adjourn? Motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you. Good night.